For our next guest, we are joined by Adam Zivo. He has just released a new documentary called Government Heroin. He's also the founder and director of the Center for Responsible Drug Policy. We're also going to be joined by Callum Bagnall. If you've watched Government Heroin, which I do suggest you give it a go after the show, he is featured prominently as one of the main interviews, and he's going to share a little bit about his story today as a recovered addict. Adam and Callum, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So I want to just start by touching on your documentary, Adam, Government Heroin. Callum, you are featured prominently as one of the main interviews, and you share a little bit about your story as a recovered addict. And one of the things that struck me when you were talking is, by all accounts, you seem like you have a loving family. You seem, fairly well to do, and you didn't exactly strike me as someone who would fall. I think for a lot of us Canadians, when we think of people who are addicts, you didn't strike me as someone who would fit that category. You were obviously surrounded by a lot of people who cared about you, and I think in the end that was what eventually pulled you out of your addiction. But I think it speaks to the fact that this crisis is really impacting people we don't think of initially, or we wouldn't initially suspect as being drug addicts. Can you share a little bit about that, if that's sort of your understanding of it as well, when we hear about some of the experts who are saying 15 and 16-year-olds are becoming addicted to government opioids? Is this crisis really changing the narrative on who is becoming addicted to drugs?
Yeah, like it definitely is. I remember when I was in high school, I didn't really have the chance to get addicted to Percocets or anything like that because they would come around very infrequently. Like you might have a friend who had his wisdom teeth pulled out, or maybe he like broke his arm, and that was it. Nothing major. They're only getting like a 1 month supply, maybe less. So there was a very low chance that you would have anybody who could get you any, right? And until I got to college, I kind of got in touch with a guy. I was just hanging out with him, but he was buying Percocets and stuff, and they were extremely easy to get if you had the right guy and the right amount of money. They were expensive though, and so I never really focused too much on that because they were just so expensive. Like you might get, one time you're able to buy a bunch of them for less than $5 each, 100 or more. But it's very infrequent because they're kind of hard to get, and a lot of them that are really cheap are counterfeits. So you want to avoid those. And you know, uh, but I was really amazed at how available the safe supply pills were. Like it almost basically in my addict mind at the time, it was my saving grace because I couldn't afford Percocets or Oxys anymore, and they were becoming harder and harder to come by. I would have to tell somebody who I knew multiple days in advance before I could get it, and it was always a toss up of whether he was going to have it or not. And when the safe supply really expanded, because I didn't hear too much about it until it really started to expand. It was so easy that I stopped even going to my dealers. I would just go straight to the people who had the prescriptions. And I knew that it would be more advantageous for them too, because if they trade with the dealer, they're not getting much value for their money, right? They're only basically trading for product. And they don't really know the full price of the pills because they're getting them for free or very, very, very reduced cost to the point where they're willing to sell it for $1 each. And that kind of amount, the supply and the cheapness of it makes it so that, it's going to become more available. If I was a dealer and I had a bunch of guys that I was selling fentanyl to who owed me money, right? And they were all on safe supply pills, I would say, hey, I'll pick up your scripts every week and then I'll give you, I'll take, I don't know, $500 off your debt because I would know that the fentanyl cost me very little money, but I could mark up those safe supply pills from, the basically zero cost that I'm getting it for to all the way up to $20 to $25 a pill and sell it at schools like colleges or at high school parties, right? Those are the guys that are going to be paying, $10 or $15 a pill or more. Because high school, even when I was younger, when pills weren't really a big thing, Xanax was really on the scene in high school. Everybody was talking about Xanax and everybody was getting Xanax. And pills are a very like it's interesting how like normalized they are, I guess, so that it makes it easier for people to want to do it, you know, because it's like, oh, my mom takes this for her anxiety, or my dad takes this for his back pain, you know.
And Callum, as I mentioned before, when you talked about in the documentary, you have this moment where you say, one of the reasons that I was pushed into recovery is because I could see the pain in my loved ones' eyes as I would lie to them time and time again. And eventually that drove me to wanting to seek treatment. So would you then ultimately say that it was the fact that you did have a loving family that was the reason that you decided to seek treatment for your addiction?
Yeah, a lot of it too is that, like that's one thing that, you know, um, it really does make a difference. And the sad thing about like a lot of guys that I had come into contact with, and gals that were all, addicted to fentanyl, but selling me their safe supply pills, essentially like, they were at their you know, last end of the road. Basically their family, had turned their backs on them because they gave them reason to, right? Addiction is very deceptive. It makes you, it makes you want things that you don't really want. It makes you do things you don't want to do. It makes you go back on your word. It makes you, unable to basically show up for things that you need to show up for. You become more of like, and if you don't basically if you don't allow your family to help, eventually they may, depending on the family too, they may kind of, be like, okay, I'm done dealing with this for a while because I don't know what to do, right? It's very hard to deal with, because I've had, I've had other family members with other issues, right? Even alcoholism, in Canada is a big thing too, and it's very hard to tell somebody to not do something when their mind is really, really set on it. And the very powerful thing about addiction is that you build your whole kind of, I guess, way of life around it. When you've been doing whatever you're doing for long enough, it becomes a part of you almost. And
So,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I just kind of was thinking like, at the same time too, uh, you know, uh, the environments that come with stuff that's as intense as fentanyl, it can really hurt the family too. Like I was lucky I never got into it, but I saw how worried my family was, when I was gone, and they knew I was, going to places where I shouldn't be because, let's say like I fell asleep, they would open my bag and like they would see like, like a switchblade or something because I did not feel safe in these environments. And I knew that if anybody felt that they could take advantage of me, they would. It can get very dangerous, especially when everybody has their back up against the wall. With fentanyl, it really does do that. It makes it so that everybody's on their last dime today. They're on their last leg. They're going to have to make a last ditch effort to make money. And it makes it very volatile too, and it makes people, do things they don't want to, like steal. It's just bad all around, right? It hurts everybody, and
Right.
sometimes for the family it gets too painful, and it just really hurt me to be like the source of that pain. It kind of took me a while to really think about it, but eventually, when I'd seen like the way my parents, when they talked to me, and when they saw the things I was doing, I could see the pain in their eyes, and it was really, it really hurt because that wasn't me. I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to hurt my family, right? But it does kind of take something that really gets to you to kind of pull you out of it.
So, with that in mind, Adam, what is your response to something like what they're pitching in Alberta, where Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has said that she would like to pass legislation that would essentially force addicts into recovery if that's what their family desires? Would you be in favor of something like that? It's still considered quite controversial, even among conservatives, especially given what we just came out of during the COVID-19, where we saw a lot of coerced vaccination. What would your response be to a policy like that?
I think it's a good idea in theory, and I think that while some people have said that it would not be able to survive a constitutional challenge, I think that there's precedent here. We do involuntarily institutionalize people who are going through mental health crises. But the big question here is whether or not there would be capacity to absorb people who need to be put into involuntary treatment. In many parts of Canada, there is so little addiction treatment capacity that people who voluntarily seek out treatment cannot get help. And this is why Marshall Smith, who is Daniel Smith's chief of staff and who has been the big architect of Alberta's recovery oriented system, has actually cautioned other provinces to go very carefully into the forced treatment space. So he recently chimed in when the BC government said that they were going to explore involuntary treatment, and he emphasized that you need to spend years building out your treatment capacity so that you actually have spaces to put people when you want to force them into treatment against their will. Now, from my understanding, the evidence base for forced addiction treatment is inconclusive. Some people have said that it doesn't work. Some people have said that it works. What I'm hearing from the addiction physicians who I speak to right now is that they're not sure either way. What we can say, though, is that even if mandatory treatment has a low success rate, that is better than no success rate. It is better to put someone into a treatment option that may save their life 5% of the time and to put them into that treatment option again and again and again, understanding that while they're in treatment, they're no longer harming others, than to simply abandon them onto the streets and allow them to destroy themselves while posing a threat to general society.
Yeah, I think Alberta is doing things a lot differently than some of the other provinces. So it'll be interesting to see the evidence coming out of the province over the next few years, whether some of these processes like forced treatment end up working. We might have more evidence on that within, 10 to 15 years. Adam, we actually have a clip of your documentary. Let's play that now so viewers can get a sense of what to expect when they go watch Government Heroin.
Hey, I'm Callum Bagnall. I'm a student at Fanshawe, but I also was a drug addict for a while, and I did end up being addicted to safe supply drugs. For a while, I was taking Percocets, Oxys, but then it got too expensive around 2021. In that time, I got connected with somebody through a job who lived at a one of those buildings where they have post-homeless people. They were able to live in this building with income-geared rent. He told me, hey, in this new building I'm living in, there's loads of people that are on these safe supply drugs. At first I didn't believe it. I was like, there's no way that on that scale people are getting hundreds of pills a day or close to 100 pills a day. I got numbers and contacts for safe supply pills, and I was able to pick up safe supply drugs much cheaper than Oxys or Percocets.
So, Adam, this issue came on my radar first with Aaron Gunn's work. Canada is dying and Vancouver is dying. I know a lot of my viewers have seen those, and I encourage everyone who I talked to go watch those documentaries. So, what were you seeking to do with Government Heroin that was different than what we already saw? And how did you hope to kind of further expand on this issue?
Well, so I've been reporting on safer supply diversion since about May of 2023. And I've written about 50 articles on this issue about how safe supply drugs are being diverted en masse to the streets. Unfortunately, many of the advocates that support safe supply, they say that this is all disinformation. They say that there is no evidence that this is happening, which is really unfortunate because I've interviewed dozens of addiction physicians who say that this is happening. I've interviewed a large number of former drug users who say this is happening. I've, found countless examples of this trafficking happening online. Uh, and although the provincial government in BC is slowly beginning to admit that this is a problem, federal government continues to deny any issue whatsoever. Because, I mean, let's be honest, their political future is tied to this program. It's really embarrassing if the signature addiction policy that you championed for years is actually a disaster that is getting kids hooked on opioids. So I have interviewed many former drug users who have either accessed diverted safer supply or know other people who have accessed diverted safer supply. But because there is such a crushing stigma against addiction, many of these people don't want to go on record. And so I either have to only use their first names or use pseudonyms. I can't include any photographs of them. And what that means is that Canadians don't have an opportunity to fully understand the stakes involved here and the harms of safer supply because, in a sense, the victims are hidden behind a veil. The details, photographs, videos that impart vivid authenticity into the storytelling is missing here. And this has allowed many of these safer supply advocates to convince many Canadians that this is not a real problem. So when Callum reached out to me about 2-3 months ago and shared his story and said that he was willing to go on record and he was willing to go on video, I saw this as a very powerful opportunity to show Canadians what is actually happening. Because when you watch someone and hear someone describe their personal experiences, and you do the same with their mother and with their doctor, it's far harder to say that there is no problem. And I do know that Aaron Gunn has interviewed people who have been harmed by safer supply as well. The difference between this work and his is, once again, that Callum is on record and that the length of the interview and detail that we go into his life is greater than what we've seen in previous documentaries. Though I imagine that Aaron Gunn will probably release more work in the future that will further expand on this story.
When you talk about the government's success really being tied to this program, I mean, there's more evidence coming out every day of how much of a failure this policy has been, with people like Callum speaking out, although admittedly, as you mentioned, not always putting their names and faces to the story. What's it going to take to see a change? Is it really just one of those things, like with so many other things in Canada right now, where we're waiting for a change in government?
So there's two sides. So first of all, there needs to be a change in government, and we see this in BC. We're in the lead up to the BC election next month. The BC NDP have backtracked on a large number of safer supply policies because they see that it's become a political liability and that their polling numbers are slumping and that voters are defecting en masse to the Conservatives. The BC Conservatives only had 2% of the vote about a year and a half ago. Now they have 44%, approximately 40%. So they're running neck and neck with the BC NDP. And what that means is that all of a sudden decriminalization is off the table, crack pipe vending machines off the table, safer bathrooms where public washrooms are converted into overdose prevention sites. That's off the table because Premier Eby knows that if he doesn't pivot, that he's going to lose his government. So I would imagine that the federal Liberals will have to go with a similar kind of reckoning in about a year or so as well. Now, the second route, of course, is the legal route with lawsuits. So in BC, the family of a young girl, 13 years old, who died from addiction after developing an opioid addiction due to safer supply. So her family is launching a class action lawsuit against the BC government and a few other stakeholders as well. And the friends of that girl who developed opioid addictions but did not die but are in recovery are part of that lawsuit. So I think that's something that will pressure governments into changing their policies and also will pressure prescribers into not prescribing safer supply because they know that they risk getting sued. Now, safer supply is also a provincial matter because healthcare falls under provincial jurisdiction. The federal government has funded safer supply programs, and it has created some exemptions that allow for the prescribing of safer supply drugs. But fundamentally, if you're prescribed safer supply in Ontario, for example, that goes through our provincial healthcare system. It is dispensed through our pharmacies and then billed to OHIP. So provincial governments do have a role to play here. The Alberta government made it functionally illegal to prescribe safer supply. They did face some lawsuits and they were forced to continue providing safer supply to, I believe, one person. Ontario could go down that same route. But the problem is that, from my understanding, they are concerned about the legal challenges there and are trying to find a way to legally block access to safer supply without getting stuck in a quagmire of lawsuits.
So even if, let's say, next year we have an election, the Liberal government's toppled, we have a Conservative government that wants to end safe supply, we're essentially going to be stuck with a lot of addicts who are going to need help. We've talked a little bit about what Alberta's doing is different. They're really being their leadership, and they have sort of a pilot of treatment centers. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on these recovery centers. Haven't really seen that same level of investment in Ontario. So what do other governments need to do across Canada? We've talked about Alberta. Do other provinces like Ontario need to follow Alberta's lead? What are we going to essentially do with all these addicts? As you've mentioned, there's already an issue of there not being enough treatment centers for people who do want treatment. So do you see that being a crisis in the coming years?
I'd say so. And I think the thing is that on the Ontario government, the Ford government needs to have more political will here. I know that the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction, Michael Tibolo, is very competent. He's a psychologist with a background in addiction. He understands the studies. He's pushing for change. What I haven't seen in my reporting is a significant will for change from the Premier's office. Sometimes it feels like they're sweeping this under the rug or not paying too much attention. And I think they're able to do this for two reasons. A, they're able to simply blame Trudeau, and therefore they're offloading the political costs of their inaction. A great example of this is a letter that Ford wrote to Trudeau, or rather to the federal government a few months ago, where he said, we want you to stop funding these safer supply programs. We have no idea how much hydromorphone, which is an opioid as potent as heroin, is flooding into our communities because of this program. Well, that's not actually true, because hydromorphone is once again paid for through OHIP. So the provincial government should have that data. And that letter essentially offloaded all responsibility for safer supply, or rather fighting safer supply, onto the federal government. And because of that, it seems like the Ford government said, well, we've washed our hands of this. We've done what we could, when that's not the case. I also think that the Ford government is very comfortable politically. I mean, their polling numbers are great. And right now, the Ontario Liberals and Ontario NDP are in shambles. And I think that's created a sense of complacency. Because the Ford government doesn't have to worry about losing the next election, it hasn't felt that much pressure to actually address the safer supply issue. All they do is blame someone else when they should be getting these drugs off the street.
Adam, for people who want to watch your documentary and learn more about your work, where can they go?
Well, I mean, if you want to watch the documentary, you can always go on YouTube and just Google government heroin full movie. You have to do the full movie piece. Otherwise, you're going to get a whole bunch of other stuff about government heroin. And you can always follow me on X. So I'm Adam Zivo, but my X handle is Zivo Adam. That's Z-I-V with a V-O. And you can always read me in the National Post. I'm always there, at least once a week, talking about drugs and other issues.
Adam and Callum, thank you both so much.
Could I add one small thing before we end it?
Go ahead.
As Adam was saying, like with the trying to close the safe supply clinics, you'll have a lot of addicts that are, still, they've been either taking the safe supply or they rely on it to not go into withdrawals. And like what I could say to that is that we already have the medications even before a safe supply program was really rolled out. We have methadone, we have Suboxone, we got newer ones like Sublocade, which is a shot where they give you into your fat cells in your stomach, and it lasts for the whole month. You don't even have to go back another time. You get one shot and you're good. They've got even strips of Suboxone that you can put under your tongue. There's so many, and they work well. Like I think the reason why safe supply was a thing was it's hard to get addicts to want to take Suboxone or methadone because you're not going to be getting high from Suboxone unless you're taking a dose that's too high for you. Or with methadone, even though it could get you high, it's heavily controlled. You have to go to the clinic like every morning for probably more than a year to build up enough rapport to bring back carry medications home. And I think yes, it is hard to go down that route, but ultimately, right? What is easy in life? The best things in life are always hard. And like for me, like Suboxone has really saved my life, right? The whole point is to not be getting high anymore. Like the high is what brought you in. You need to get out of that because it deceives you, right? You don't want to be getting high because it takes you away from what you really need to be doing in life. And that's kind of what recovery is about, just living without needing to get high.
Callum, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.